Associate Professor Robert Sharp of the NISA Center for Strategic Studies, thank you for receiving us. We would like today to talk about the network of defense and staff colleges which you're involved with, and secondly, your area of expertise, Yemen, as it was in the news lately as an Al-Qaeda video surfaced that would apparently filmed in Yemen. Let's start with the network of defense and staff colleges. What is the purpose of the network of defense and staff colleges, and who participates?
Okay. We call it NDSC, and the intent behind NDSC is to gather commandants and deans and key faculty of all our regional defence and staff colleges with the purpose of drawing them together to share best practice. So you can imagine that maybe there's a particular country that has moved forward with a certain area of curriculum. Maybe they're discussing the implications of the so-called Arab Spring, doing it in a particular way that makes it more understandable for students to contribute to the discussion. And there may be another institution somewhere that's struggling maybe with trying to frame that debate. And so, a defence college from a particular country can share curriculum with another country and the way in which they're benefiting from the methodologies that they're employing. So ultimately, everybody ends up better off. And so we have so far two annual events. The first one was held in Beirut, hosted by the Command and Staff College of the Lebanese Armed Forces. The second one was held in Amman, Jordan, hosted by the Jordanian Defence College. Our intention for the third Network of Defence and Staff Colleges meeting is to either hold it in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or alternatively to hold it in Oman. We will again join together all the commandants and deans of regional defence and staff colleges to exchange best practice. And we're hoping that the National Defence University president will also attend that event.
Okay. And what do you expect in the next seminar in Riyadh in terms of the topics discussed and the countries present, or represented, I should say?
Indeed. We would hope that the sort of topics that we would be discussing would be topics relating to issues like faculty development, faculty selection, curriculum development, curriculum design, teaching methodologies, how to teach, accreditation. Most of the countries want to achieve accreditation as part of professional development, maybe even linking to American accreditation ultimately. The utility of educational technologies, things like blackboard environments, wireless networks for readings as PDFs rather than reams of paper being produced. And also things like library services, how to share best practice of the utility of libraries within the learning environment.
How many countries are involved, and which one, if you remember all of them?
Yeah, it's about half the countries so far within the NISA region are included. So primarily at the moment we're talking about Gulf countries with some Levant countries, and our intention with the October event is to include some of our North African countries and also some of our Central and South Asia countries. So ultimately, we hope that over a period of 3, 5, 10 years, because these things take time, and bringing about change in these sorts of institutions, as we find with our own institutions here in the US, takes time. But we hope to generate enough of an incentive among the participants that they see benefit from having this event. And that essentially they then self-regulate and self-direct their agenda, and we facilitate and provide support. We hope that the event that will occur in 2015 will be hosted by the United Arab Emirates National Defence College, and then year after, whichever country wants to pick up the baton to move forward. The event is organised with a NISA. We call ourselves co-facilitators rather than co-directors, because it's all about our country participants, not about us. And so I'm really one of the key facilitators. Mr. Sterling Jensen has been supporting me on that throughout. And also another co-facilitator is a Lebanese Army retired general, Brigadier General Hani Nakla, who's a NISA distinguished alumnus, who has been supporting the whole series of events throughout.
Let's move on to your area of expertise, Yemen. I understand you've been there a few times, and you've given a few talks on Yemen and the overall region. What domestic and regional issues does Yemen face right now?
Okay. Interesting you use the phrase expert. I think for Yemen, if anybody thinks they're an expert on Yemen, they don't know Yemen, because it's such a complex environment. So I would consider myself knowledgeable about Yemen, but there are so many challenges that Yemen is facing at the moment that to be able to understand all of them and the implications across Yemeni society and civil society would be extremely complex. Really the main threat that Yemen faces at the moment is from Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, because in the course of the last couple of years, Al-Qaeda have mounted attacks against the US from Yemen. 2 cases of underwear bombers, 1 case of printer cartridge bombers. And those attacks, although not as kinetically dramatic as the outcome of 9/11, thankfully, have essentially been, in principle, the same. They were attacks against the US. And so Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula is able to operate within Yemen from ungoverned spaces, places where they are providing to the people services including water, electricity, food, and security, and the Yemen government isn't able to do that. And so as a result, you get a direct threat posed to regional stability and indeed global security, and a direct threat to the US. And therefore the terrorism piece is really the main challenge and America's main interest in Yemen. But the reason why we have this threat is linked to a range of other issues that Yemen has. So for instance, Yemen has a population of about 24 million people. It clearly was the place where the Arab world began. The first settlers were in Yemen, and they moved. So most Arab countries link back to Yemen. Yemen has a very, very high unemployment rate. It has a very high illiteracy rate. It has some very worrying statistics with respect to malnutrition. And as a country, although it sits within the Arabian Peninsula, it is more on a par with sub-Saharan Africa in terms of its challenges. And so what tends to happen in Yemen, as we've seen, is that youth who are unemployed, therefore in poverty, not much food, it's very easy for Al-Qaeda to radicalize uneducated, unemployed youth, because Yemen has a birth rate of about 6.1, which means that Yemen will double in size within the next generation, and there simply aren't enough jobs. And so therefore, if you have spaces that are governed by Al-Qaeda, and in those spaces you have people who are unemployed, disenfranchised, then it's very easy to radicalize them, and therefore the problem gets greater and greater. And so when we're looking at solutions for Yemen, they become very complex, and they have to be multiple solutions. Yes, we can use drones as authorized by the Yemeni government to attack Al-Qaeda strongholds and disrupt their operations. But we have to follow through with economic, social and political programs to convince the people that the way of violence as advocated through Al-Qaeda is not the way to go. Mm-hmm. We need to provide jobs to the youth, we need to provide food, we need to provide security. And so it links into the need for Yemen to be able to close those ungoverned spaces and as any sovereign state would want to do, gain control of their area of responsibility. And this, of course, then links to the fact that Yemen has a youth bulge, which I mentioned earlier, and then the fact that Yemen has also gone through a version of its own so-called Arab Spring, which, as a result of uprisings in Yemen and the removal of President Ali Abdullah Saleh as president, Yemen has gone through a process of reform under a GCC initiative that has led to a national dialogue that concluded very early this year and now is leading to the rewriting of Yemen's constitution, a referendum on that constitution, and then parliamentary and presidential elections. And at the same time, trying to garner support from international donors to support economic and social programs, to do security sector reform, to reshape Yemen's military so it's able to deal with challenges both domestic and regional. And so the solution to Yemen is a whole of government solution. It can't just be fixed by providing water in a region. It can't just be fixed by equipping Yemen's counter-terrorism forces with special weapons. It has to be a whole of government solution, which normally therefore means it's more expensive and more comprehensive and therefore more complex. There are many challenges that face Yemen, and I think that what we have seen in the last couple of months is that there is a feeling in Yemen among the people that they really want something different. They want change, and you could, I think, happily argue that Yemen's transition has been comparatively a success story by comparison to other countries in the region. And maybe there's lessons to be identified and learned from what Yemen has gone through. But unless Yemen receives the constant attention of international donors to help it move to where it needs to be, it can very easily slide back to the bad old days, which would be tragic.
You mentioned American interest in terms of counterterrorism. I'm assuming there's also an interest in stabilizing the country, like you said, in terms of domestic reforms and hopefully raise the standards of living for various reasons related to terrorism as well. Beyond that, however, what are American interests in Yemen? I'm thinking of naval, perhaps, or economic. What would they be?
Well, there are several. I think the most compelling one, and the one that I think resonates best with policymakers in Washington, is that if we were to think about the concept of rebalancing, President Obama's policy paper in 2012 that talked about the fact that America would be rebalancing out of the Atlantic into the Indian Ocean region as essentially a counter to rising India and rising China and the ungoverned space that is the Indian Ocean region, as those rising economies draw more and more resources from the Middle East. Some people have called it a pivot, and there's been debate about whether it's rebalancing or a pivot. I like to think of it in a sense of a basketball player who keeps one foot on the ground as you move the other foot. Right. So you keep one foot on the ground on the Middle East, and then you move one foot from the Atlantic into the Indian Ocean region. And one of the issues about this ungoverned space is that you have choke points like the Bab el-Mandeb, and also the Suez Canal, and also the Straits of Hormuz. And then moving further east, you have the Straits of Malacca. And those are the choke points through which these resources will flow, which by nature of a choke point is somewhere that needs to be secured to bring governance to the region. So I think that Yemen has a role to play in helping the US, in my view, to secure the western end of that rebalancing. And if we were to perhaps equip the Yemen Coast Guard or the Yemen Navy to support the securing of the Bab el-Mandeb, an area where we have Somali pirates operating, we have flows of refugees from East Africa into the Arabian Peninsula. I think Yemen could have a strategic relationship with the US as an ally to secure that edge. And then, of course, America can focus its interests in other areas because it has a willing partner in Yemen providing that, the securing of that Bab el-Mandeb choke point.
Drone strikes are in the news a lot. People are trying to understand, or at least the debate is on whether the U.S. should use them more or less. Yemen has been one of those places where U.S. drone strikes have been used, and apparently some of them, at least, at the request of the Yemeni government. What should we expect in the coming years in terms of U.S. drone strikes in that region and the response of the Yemeni government?
Yeah, it's a very sensitive issue, drone strikes in Yemen, as it is in any country. And I am informed that the Yemen government is in agreement with all activities that are conducted. Maybe not necessarily specifically event on event, but the underlying principle of the sorts of targets that are considered to be engageable. It was only the back end of last year when, shortly after Al-Qaeda had attacked the Ministry of Defense hospital installation and killed people in their beds, and were claiming that that's where the drones were being operated from, that it was a short period after that, a drone strike in the south hit a group which was reported as being a wedding party. And as a result of that, the Yemeni parliament attempted to vote to try and pass a law to prevent drone strikes. But of course, President Hadi has agreed to the principle of drone strikes. And indeed, if you were to ask the Yemeni what they want in terms of military capabilities in the future, although I think it would be unlikely they would get them because of the level of technology and the expense to maintain these capabilities, which Yemen doesn't have. They've asked for drone capabilities themselves because they are so effective. I think we always have to understand, although it's not a particularly easy pill to swallow, there's always going to be some collateral damage as a result of a military strike. Military strikes are not as precision as maybe we'd like them to be. And I think that the sort of guiding principle is, is the benefit that accrues from the removal of an individual or a group from the battle worth the tragic loss of collateral life that may occur in order to secure that target array. And I think if you were to look statistically at the drone strikes that have occurred in Yemen over the last 4 or 5 years, the number of collateral casualties have substantially reduced by comparison to what I think the media believes. And certainly, there is not a weapons-free environment in Yemen. The operations are coordinated at the highest level and are as precision as they can be. But of course, Al-Qaeda, and various other agencies will use anything they can to try and discredit, these operations. I think that as long as there is an Al-Qaeda presence in Yemen generating ungoverned spaces, which the Yemeni are incapable of closing down, then ultimately it presents a real and present danger to our national security, and we will act in accordance with our interests. So I think we will continue to use drone strikes to reduce the threat of an attack against our homeland until that threat is no longer there. And I think that we would like the Yemeni to do more, and we will help them to do more. But you know, as a sovereign country, we exercise our rights to defend ourselves, and of course it is coordinated with the Yemeni government.
Professor Robert Sharp, thank you very much.